welcome, Tom, to the Agriton podcast. Thank you very much for taking some time out today to go through some bits of your amazing network that you have. So for anyone that's not listened before, my name is Martyn Richards. I'm from Agriton in the UK. We specialise in sustainable products, that lovely word that everyone loves to use, and yeah, it gives me a bit of a cringe as well sometimes when I say it, but we generally try and do as much as we can to use less and gain more. So for us, it's a really important thing, and this is why Tom and myself have been very friendly over the last couple of years. We worked closely on some projects, but also, yeah, I wanted to show the world, you know, what the Old Tree Soil Network can do. So, Tom, can you introduce yourself?
Great, thanks, Martyn. Yeah, so yeah, my name is Tom Daniel. I am a sort of lifelong student of soil now, but I started out sort of becoming an environmentalist after moving to Brighton to do sort of art and creative stuff. But I became sort of very inspired by the what I can only describe as like the community garden movement in Brighton, and that was where I've got my first sort of compost revelations. You know, we literally turned a whole petrol station into this amazing community green space, and then over the years of doing more of that kind of thing, I started this brewery called Old Tree, and that's all about like creating edible landscapes. But what the sort of realization was after, you know, making compost with all of our brewery ingredients, was that, you know, to get edible landscapes, you've got to create like edible soil in a way. Like, you know, it was the way we were feeding the soil that was creating the landscapes we wanted to see. And that was where I started to realize it was all about the biology and compost. And as a result of that, sort of studied the food web and became very, very inspired when lockdown happened, put a huge amount of energy into a composting club, which has carried on for the last 4 years and has I would say, inspired quite a few others to start similar community enterprises in their regions. And that was where this idea for the Mycelium Composting Network, which you've been a really valuable member of, Martyn, for a couple of years. But yeah, it's just this idea that, you know, we are in many ways like, you know, mycelium, our brains and our body, you know, the way that life is kind of like a mycelium branching, you know, information sharing, resource sharing network. And you know, what's so clever about fungi is that they are so resilient, and they can kind of grow everywhere. Like no matter what humans do, fungi will grow and turn waste into, you know, new life again. And it's just such an inspiring metaphor, such an inspiring system. And so we're trying to like replicate that, but with our knowledge, because, you know, I really believe like what's been shown is that we're all like now in our current modern world in kindergarten, you know, when it comes to soil. I read that in a book, but we're all in kindergarten when it comes to soil. We've all got so much to learn from each other and from all the books we're reading and from this podcast, and also information sharing people are doing all the time. And so, yeah, I'm kind of trying to host this online space where everyone can store that information and communicate and network more easily. And we can create this kind of like decentralized community composting culture that's also connected, because I believe that, yeah.
And that, for me, that's the reason why, you know, I've spent a lot of time with the Mycelium Network, is because knowledge is power as long as you share it. And one thing I love about the group that we have and the community we have at the moment is that there is so much out there that I can't specialize in. I can't specialize in every part of soil. Soil is such a massive subject, and actually what we need specialists in certain areas, so that when generalists, which we need more of in the world, you know, generalists are few and far between. We need to be able to you know, have a network to be able to gain all this information, so that when we ask a question, then obviously you know, there is a place and a space for it. And I think you're the same as me. The problem is with the internet is that it's so big, and there's so many different variations. And one thing, as we both know, is that even setting up one community composting project doesn't necessarily that we can replicate it easily in every respect, because every microbiome is different, same as obviously when it comes to community. So I'm going to do a shameless plug for you, because I really want to let the listeners know, how can they find you online to join the Mycelium Network?
Thanks, Martyn. Yes. So to join the network, simply go to. There's two ways of doing it. One is to follow us on Instagram and hit the link in our bio, and then you'll find a link to the Mycelium Network, which is the software we're using to host the forum, and you can sign up directly there. And the other way is simply through our website, which is oldtreesoil.org, and it's right there on the homepage, and yeah, can subscribe there, and both lead to the same thing, and both get the same discounts of the stuff that we supply as well, to help people do better local composting. And I think that's the thing from my point of view, is the reason why I want this group to grow is because we would like to share our knowledge, but also the quality of information that we get as a network is excellent. And actually, one thing I love about it is I see the negatives as well as the positives. The problem is with the internet generally is you see all these positives are like, oh, this works and this is amazing, etc., and that kind of persona. But actually, you learn a lot from the mistakes. Totally.
I'm gonna put you under the bus in respects to mistakes. Obviously, you've been doing composting a long time. Biggest mistake that you would give someone as a recommendation if they were going to set up a local composting system? What would be the one thing, just to kind of give people a piece of advice of like, I've learned this now, I wouldn't do it this way?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I just think of my biggest mistake in the last year or so was composting apple pulp without properly like either using bokashi or adding enough carbon. I didn't have, you have to have one of those two things, and I was just in a situation where I just had 2 tons of apple pulp and not enough suitable aeration. And I thought, I'll take that knowledge from the Soil Food Web course and do like Johnson Sue tubes and put it on a pallet, but it was the worst. It was absolute disaster. Basically turned to 2 tons of like apple cider vinegar that was so acidic it dissolved the metal cage on the pallet I put it in to hold it, and then like created this dead zone in my in the property's lawn that I was working on. So that was real.
You learn from these things, though. Learn from these things.
This new year's looking a lot better.
So I've got a question for you then, because that quite nicely leads on to your bokashi project, because you went, Martyn, I can hear you keep telling me about bokashi and apple pulp. How is that part? Have you opened it up yet, or is it still?
Yeah. So we had a look, and it's definitely looking good, and there's some really interesting fungi growing, which I wasn't expecting.
What was the carbon source used?
It was straw, which we shredded as much as possible, but obviously we didn't have like any industrial equipment. We just had lots of hands. So we shredded the straw as much as possible. We worked it in as much as possible. We stamped it down as much as possible, and we soaked it in the bokashi, the right volume of bokashi, and we sprinkled in the right dosage of your what's it called, egg the lime,
Agir seashell grit,
seashell grit, which is important to balance the pH, to stop that like insane acidity that apples have a tendency to go to, otherwise known as apple cider vinegar, which is good for our guts in small amounts, but not great for your soil at all.
Not on the soil. As I can tell you that, it's not going to be good for the soil. So. Going away from obviously apple pulp and stuff like that, your the inspiration I've had from you generally, the energy that you bring to the group, and the amazing things you're doing. I really want to expand on your Soil Food Web knowledge, because that is an area that that I'm still learning. So if for the listeners, can you expand a bit more about what you've learned, what your takeaways are from the Soil Food Web? Is it worth the money to do it, etc.?
Great question. Yeah, it's a hell of a lot of money. I do not regret it though, because it was just like really what I needed to find out at that point. Like I'd got to a point where I could see there was something about this steaming compost and this fungi compost that we'd had success in making. I could see its power. Sort of had that sort of kind of mind shift change of like, it's all about how we feed the soil. And then it really was, because Elaine Ingham's knowledge, 30 years or so studying, like, and that amazing thing. She wrote an amazing document about nematode grazers that's been sort of like, it's one of the most cited sort of things in biological soil sort of science. And I really got a lot out of the course. One thing that it made me, I would say, a bit too transfixed on, like, is like this idea of like good guys and bad guys in the soil. So like I love what I loved is that it gives you this, like, it gives you this the knowledge, the biological sort of literacy to understand that what's in the soil is they call it nature's operating system, like it's, and many ways when you start to like get grips with that, it's like, okay, so it's all about the bacteria and the fungi and their numbers, and then it's about like what's eating them and their numbers. Once you start to get grips, you realize it's like that's the base of all the food chain of like the whole rest of the ecosystem, and that's super powerful, like the micro to the macro. And how can we expect our wider ecosystem that we all love and know to stop declining when we're not feeding or nurturing the microbial ecosystem in the land? And so I just think that's extremely powerful. But going back to what maybe it does do, which isn't so positive, is like transfixes you on like good guys, bad guys, because so for example, fungi are absolutely worshipped. The decomposing fungi are sort of really praised in the soil because they show you how fungi in the soils affect what can grow, like succession basically. So if you've got really no fungi in your soil will just grow weeds, and if you've got loads of fungi, you'll be able to grow trees and roses and grapes, and then in the middle, if you've got a good balance, you'll be able to grow like wheat and row crops and stuff that we all like to mostly eat, right? So it's like everyone wants to get more fungi, and that's, to be honest, has been a real pursuit of ours, to try and figure out how we can make fungal rich compost with the local inputs of our area, which is a lot of food waste. But everyone's inputs are different, and as we've seen now, by spending quite a lot of time, and we've had lots of people on the network doing their soil food web lab programs, so they're becoming microscopists, so we can actually measure this stuff together. And we've used various like soil microscopists, like Perry, for example, so shout out to Soil Redemption, who's done a lot of ours, has shown us that oftentimes, despite our best attempts, we're not getting enough of this fungi like that we really want to make it complete compost. Whereas just making a pile of leaf mold with some tubes in it, like the Johnson Su design, has proven you're getting like really, really high fungi. So it's like, wow, we don't actually even need this food waste, and we could just be going out and harvesting the leaves together, and that would make the fungi compost. But just understanding that there are different composts for different applications, that's what it's given me. And so like now I understand, like, we've got loads of these little protozoans and they're all eating 10,000 bacteria a day, and that's like, if you can have Peter recently had a test, he had 10 million of them. This is Luke.
Yeah, so amazing.
Gram of the one of the predators of bacteria, all doing, which would do so much sort of work in the soil to sort of, especially when most agricultural soils are so bacterially dominated, it would really kickstart the sort of ecosystem, I believe, and from hearing friends that have gone further with the Soil Food Web course and doing the consultancy, like they get results and they consult with farmers. They get trained to consult with farmers, and I'm still a disciple of the Soil Food Web, but also of other types of composting, and other methods. I think all have their place, and it's just a sort of great
Diversity is key. This is the thing, is that when and you've kind of summed up the soil food web, you need to have that basic knowledge. If you want to, if you want to create biocomplete compost, and you want to look at fungi and bacteria ratios, and you want to regenerate the soil to do what the soil should be doing, you need to have that basic knowledge. But as we've said as a company, and I hear a lot in the network, diversity is key. This is why we're together, and as a group, is that diversity is really important. And when I first met you, I've got to be honest, I heard a lot of negativity on anaerobic, and I was lucky to be able to have someone like yourself to listen to kind of my view on it. But I think the thing is,
that was a big thing we did. They don't mention they basically say anaerobic is all bad in the soil food web course, because they just don't want to confuse their message, because aerobic bacteria are good in agricultural contexts that they are working in. But but they also then go on to, you can watch it. Elaine isn't talking about, she's
doing one thing. Doing one thing. She's selling the course, and she's trying to do a mass production of something to help the bigger picture. So, and this is where the negativity is not that. My issue is not the anaerobic is bad and aerobic is good, but people like Matt Powers, who is kind of built on the knowledge, and that's the key thing, isn't it? It's when you get this basic knowledge of anything, then you need to explore yourself and make your own judgments on things. So I know yourself and Matt Powers, who has been a big ambassador of the Elaine Ingram soil food web, and obviously he's now started to expand his knowledge and his understanding of that biodiversity. But without that basic knowledge, then it's very hard for people to understand.
Absolutely. No, Matt Powers is doing some amazing work with his microscopy.
He's doing really well, really well. I think the thing is with with all these systems is that probably as us as a company, we're probably as bad as anyone else when we say this is the right way of doing it, and nature doesn't work like that. We're looking at the environmental impacts we've had at the moment. Farmers around the UK are now getting a bad rapport because supposedly every farmer, and I'm going to generalize now, is killing and destroying the soil. But you've got to understand as well that we've had biblical rain. The rain we've had in the last 6 months has been not seen since the 1980s. So there is going to be a big change in environmental impacts. And what I love about nature is that diversity means that you have the ability to repair. And I think the more we look at soil and more we understand it, the less we know, but also the more we understand how resilient it is. Very similar to human microbiome in the way it works.
Absolutely.
I think the whole technology, and what I love about soil is that the more I find out about it, the more it's very similar to human body in respects that it works. Nitrogen is very similar to protein, and carbohydrates very similar to carbon. And that for me probably was something you said actually probably about 2 years ago that kind of was a catalyst of you, without you even knowing it, you kind of made it reality to me. And I sit on these calls sometimes, and I do feel a little bit of imposter syndrome. My specialist area is Bokashi. I love it. I've got a big passion in it. The other passion I have is kind of networking. I love talking to people. But I remember 2 years ago, I've been with Agriton 3 years now. And 2 years ago, we kind of started talking, and I was interested to see what you were doing. Definitely a salesman back then. Not going to beat around the bush with it. Tom's now laughing because he knows what I was like back then. And it was you and a couple other people that kind of made me stand back and think about the kind of bigger picture. And Jan, who's one of my bosses here, he's taught me a big skill and life lesson is to ask questions and never be afraid to ask them. And you get older and you realize that actually the questions you ask is not that you are an idiot or you don't understand. It's sometimes you just need a way of understanding, and it was you actually that put it into that human kind of biome state. And you just made a comment exactly what I just said about the nitrogen and protein. I was like, Oh, I get that. So my background is I used to be a big guy. I was actually like I was at my biggest. I was 20 stone at one stage. Um, yeah. So this is something you don't know. Yeah, and I then realised that if I could feed myself with proteins and fats and carbohydrates, and I could then reduce the amount that I was eating and increase the amount of exercise I was doing, then I became a healthier person. And the key thing is with soil is exactly the same thing. So what's your thoughts on the world of NPK then?
Well, I just think, yeah, obviously, I think it's like I think it's been too sort of fixated upon, and it's the whole quantity over quality thing. It's like, I don't know. I think that, I think we didn't really appreciate how much of plants and growth and nutrition is actually coming from the air and the water. And like a tree can be like something like 90, it's actual carbohydrates, the carbon, the hydrogen, it's come from the air. Even somehow I still don't understand how trees exist, but yeah, it's come from the air and it's come from the water, and it's this sort of mad process that photosynthesis enables. And yeah, NPK are proven growth kind of producing elements that are needed. But my opinion now is that they're actually really abundant, and we can't afford to use fossil fuels to get them where we need them anymore. We have to work with biology. The nitrogen is in the rock. On the soil food web course, I learned that plants actually only need relatively small amount of nitrogen, and there's bacteria in healthy soils and certain plants which fix it for us from the air. This hugely energy intensive process that we've been pouring like epic amounts of the world's finite resources into producing at scale, so we can all eat many less plants. That's another big problem. It's like there's no point that all of this feeding the soil and feeding the biology is great, but we're also going to need to diversify our diets, diversify the plants we're growing, diversify the animals that we're farming, and just kind of try and move away to what we're advocating for, Martyn, which is diversity is key. We can all have a different process depending on our area, depending on the conditions there. That also needs to move into farming and the way we're growing our crops and nurturing our animals, and just mix up the culture, because I believe passionately, like, variety is the spice of life, as the old saying goes.
So
And
are you telling me that the listeners don't want to have that you're going to tell them the listeners now that you can't get strawberries all year round? I don't know how that's going to go down with the listeners, but
there are so many other things that they could have all year round, like these trees, and they grow fruit, and most of them we're not even eating or couldn't recognize that we could eat them. And yeah,
yeah.
it's
Biology for me. So when I first joined the company, so we, as a company, we are fixated on biology, and we are the lone ranger out there. But funny enough, biology has become, well, biostimulants are becoming more and more popular, because the more we're learning about the biology, the more we understand that without that, NPK is absolutely useless. They can't be processed on its own. And don't get me wrong, the strawberry incident, hydroponics could be a thing, for a part of the future, maybe for those kind of variety. But one thing that scares me more than anything else is that everything starts from the soil. Like,
yeah.
life comes from the soil.
Absolutely. We come from the soil. We somehow, the minerals in our bodies and our bones and everything, they came from the soil, because the earth used to be a rock, and everything that is living came from that rock, and the water and the air and the sun. And yeah, we need to. I'm really concerned about all of the talk about there's this kind of soil-free food system being advocated, isn't there, by certain industrial forces. And it's like this idea that we'll just be able to have everyone living in cities and just then fermenting our carbohydrates over there, and growing hydroponics for all of the leaves over there. And I just think we actually do need a culture that is more people farming. Even if, I get it, like apparently we used to have 40 or 50% of people in farming in this country, and now we've got like 2% and it's declining. And that's what all of this technology has enabled, is less people farming. But I find it quite meaningful. Today I'm going to work in a community garden. We're going to harvest our compost, and we're going to prime some seeds, and we're going to get some stuff growing. And if I didn't have that like opportunity to grow and work with people, and do all the stuff we're talking about, like discover the variety of different plants and see how you can make them grow. It's like it's part of what makes living exciting and interesting, rather than just like buying the same things every time.
So our usual kind of thing with our conversations, we divert massively into the whole bigger picture, but bringing it back down to kind of what you're doing as a group. Can you tell me a little bit about how a local composting system works? Now, I wanted to go into the local, to localization, etc. But I know that's probably another podcast for me and you later on in a year. But compost obviously is a big part of your systems. Can you tell the listeners kind of, how the process works, etc.?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just tell them, I'll just try and describe the process that we're currently operating and sort of advocating for people to. So it's specifically to deal with food waste, because that's a nutrient that we could all compost locally and save a lot of money importing those nutrients and biology. So our system is we buy buckets secondhand, and we use these to give people for their food waste. And we recommend putting bokashi in them. I've started wiping when I fill the buckets for our members. So we've got 35 members of our compost club, and I wipe the buckets with a wet cloth, and then I sprinkle bokashi, the 10 grams per 30 grams per 10 litres, was it? Yeah.
30 grams, yeah.
I do that around the buckets, so it sort of sticks to the walls. So I see it like the word inoculate is one that comes up in composting a lot, to sort of, add the biology to something. So I inoculate the bucket with compost, give it to the members, collect their full one. So that can happen without a service. People could just do that on their own. Then after the bokashi stage, what that enables is that the food waste can happily sit in the bucket for I do it every month, so I've got 4 weeks before I have to deal with that bucket, which is a nice lot of time. It doesn't smell too bad. It doesn't smell. You can see the molds, the growing on it. It's breaking down already, so it just starts that process. As I understand it, lactobacillus is happening. That's good for everything. We then use these compost tumblers, so either Rydans or Joraforms, which are insulated compost tumblers, and then it has this hot phase, which really, it's like a bioreaction phase where I think there's a lot of crazy, explosion of life, where the biology is just digesting all that plant matter and producing the heat, and so then that phase happens, and then I basically have these bins. They're wooden bins or wooden bays that we make from upcycled wood, basically. Pallet collars work brilliantly, pallets, Euro pallet, all these kind of, and make them into nice secure sort of boxes so that they could go everywhere in parks and be local, because we don't want to be carrying this stuff around. Be local, somewhere near where people are growing food as well, and then add it all to that, and then have that inoculated with worms. So tiger worms we use, Asenia fetida, I think. I heard that that's the reason they're called fetida, is because it's come from the word fetid, because apparently people in the past have eaten worms, but there's the type of tiger worm that the reason it's called fetida is because it tastes fetid, like death, so you don't want to eat the compost. But they love munching through the stuff that comes out of the insulated tumblers more than anything, and then they seem to work real magic, and it starts to turning into that beautiful crumbly worm casting stuff. And at that stage, I also add some like well rotted leaf mold or stuff from a woodland floor, because I found that definitely increases the fungal content. And then the trick is then either moving it into another bay where to get the fungi levels up, because this is harder than it sounds, and I'm convinced that it's to do with the moisture content. Because I recently tested a batch. Anyway, so I'm getting diverted. I recently tested a batch for that was one that was really dry and one that was really wet, and both of them had lower fungi than I'd had before when I hadn't had such extreme rain or extreme heat to sort of contend with in the maturation. So I want to do more work on making a bin for people that could be replicatable in different regions, which has got the right amount of airflow, just for the fungi to mature really nicely. Yeah.
Cool. I think it's the thing is that your system is, and what I love about it more than anything else, that could be. Sorry, that's our coffee machine. Always on point. Love a bit of professionalism. So the problem that most of these systems have, and one thing I've kind of realized, and the reason why the localization and the composting localization is so important to moving forward, is that actually that replication can happen very easily. So smaller, more compact systems like that don't take up too much space. There can be more of them. Obviously, the cost is involved. So Rydens for me are great systems. Drawers are great systems. Both have a premium tag with them. I feel that to kind of scale up, you need to think about smaller groups and more of them than bigger units. Just because I think from a biological point of view, if you can try, and this is what you were saying, obviously with trying to use local indigenous IMOs to be able to kind of inoculate that system to be able to then utilize into the soil, because that's really important for to understand that each ecosystem or biodiversity is very unique to an area. I'd be interested, actually, I haven't done any research, but something I would like to do a bit more research on is how far that network goes, because my understanding is that even from field to field, you get slight variations, but obviously it's more to do with the soil structure than it is to do with the biological side, because the structure of the soil will make the difference in respects to what biological system you can have in it. So actually, if you look at kind of valleys and etc., the soil systems are very different from the top to bottom, because obviously the water flow and how that's working. But for me, my kind of sole purpose really in this company is to really think about like how can we make things local. Like for me, I didn't think we'd have time, but we've got a couple of minutes. We could talk about localization, because it's a big passion for me. Like I believe that the economy and the state that we are in the UK, we need to stop looking at nationalisation and stuff. Like just stop it. Just don't do it anymore, because actually not only, and this is one thing that I love about these local composting systems, not only are you localizing it and to make it unique to an area, but you're bringing communities together, you're getting people to talk. Are you finding that with the systems? I know you've been involved with other groups. Have you seen that?
Absolutely. It brings people together then around a shared purpose. People need each other again to help, keep this turning, or make that, available in the spring when the gardeners need it. And I just think there's something really important about people needing each other, being connected to a place as well. It's like, some of these, if you make a nice community compost station and put the time in and make it look cared for and teach people how to use it, they look after it, and it comes to be a place which connects them to their land and their source of their food, and that's just really powerful. And what you're saying about the variety of the landscape, it's also to do with the wildlife. I swear that the robins are involved in inoculating the bays with fungi, and that's why I always want part of it to be open. I don't want it to be all covered, seal it in a tumbler and then seal it in a box. Like, it's like, why don't we've got to remember that this is also the food for everything else in our ecosystem. You know, the trees, the organic tree is the perfect system. It gives so much organic matter which everything else feeds off, you know. So
but also birds have microbiomes on their feet anyway. So
absolutely.
actually they're bringing in fungi, bacteria from trees, etc., landed on your compost heap, and then as long as the food sources are there for bacteria and the fungi to grow, then you have that biodiversity in there. So yeah, 100%. Like, for me, that's a big thing. So for anyone that's listening, and I know this is going to be the hardest question I'm going to give you today. If someone is part of an allotment, a group, etc., how do you start? How do you start a local composting system? What tips can you give people to kind of even have a conversation with them?
Good question. Okay. So, okay, there's two challenges, I would say. The first is that you've got to get your carbon supply sorted out. Remember that, like, you don't even need loads of food waste to make nice compost. You definitely do need a good carbon source, because carbon is the fungi food. The fungi is like really important for growing our vegetables and our food. Most of our food, obviously, it's all important, but bacteria are so much easier to cultivate in your land than fungi. So I'd invest in some sort of way of shredding, either get a good contact with a local tree surgeon, arrange for a chipper to come once or twice a year, try and find a way of funding that so that you can have plenty of good fungal food, but also, as Nikki Scott calls it, like air material. So like material that when you mix with your food scraps in your pallet bay or your Dalek or however you're going to do it, you remember you've got to mix. You need at least 50% by volume of the woody material, the stuff that holds air spaces in between it. So really, that is like a primary step, I think, is getting the shredded carbon matter, and then the next step might be to invest in a aerobic composting process to make things less heavy on people's backs, because that is the real reality of a lot of it. It's like you can make perfectly amazing compost with a pitchfork and a thermometer if you want to really go to town and get the whole soil food web abundance going for you. But you can also do it with an insulated tumbler. So then maybe get some funding. I would recommend obviously joining the Mycelium Network to get a big discount, and we can give you the support you need. And and then get that. Just remember the hot phase is needed. That's the first phase. Then I recommend the worm phase, and then the fungal phase. Obviously the bokashi phase, just to make things easier to keep at the very beginning, to sort of make it a more sustainable rhythm for that, working. That's how I see bokashi, and I've liked to use it. I'd love to work with farmers more and do it more on an agricultural scale, because I think there's a huge thing there with, animals husbandry. They spread the bokashi and mix compost so much better. They do it for free. Like we trouble ourselves with all these jobs. Like, we just need to be better at mixing and stuff. It's just like there are animals that are literally designed to do that, and it's crazy the laws around not being able to have these animals in certain situations, like not being able to feed. I know, I get it. I get why it happened, but not being able to feed pigs leftover food is so backwards.
Yes, we're not going to get into politics in this one. I haven't got that far with the podcast yet.
Totally
At some point it will happen.
Let's finish on the positive. Pot phase, worm phase, fungi phase, after the bokashi phase. And you really, with those ingredients, you'll just see that you're making this amazing material, because you can pick it up and you can see how many like tunnels, and it's just like this enormous, this life-giving sponge that you've created. And then that is just the most available source of all the nutrients, the nitrogen, the potassium, the phosphorus, as well as all of the trace elements. Oh, also adding some minerals is really good. I do believe, like, minerals are in the soil, but like adding minerals to the compost, I don't think you could go wrong with. Like, all about that as well. But I think that's the thing, is that same as us, we need
we need protein, fats, and carbohydrates, but we also need vitamins, we need micronutrients, and we need bacteria, and we need fungi ourselves. So actually, we're no different to the soil. We need that biodiversity for it to work. And it's, I just want to say to the listeners, the reason why you do the systems you do is, excuse me, is unfortunately because of law. And definitely a different podcast. We're not going to go into the laws and regulations and stuff of composting, but as you know, there's a lot of regulations in having to tick boxes. And definitely for me personally, from a company point of view, Bokashi anaerobic is still seen as bad in respects to laws and regulations. There are certain things that we can work around, but aeration just makes it safe. And I'm sure in the future, those rules and regulations will change. But yeah, it's nice to be able to get the advice that you can give as a network to make sure that everything's legally binding, etc. That the law is a minefield when it comes to this, but I'm hoping in some point in the future that there will be the people that will want to kind of look at biodiversity and look at other systems, because nature works in all sorts of ways, and actually we need to start embracing that in the way that we produce anything to do with the soil. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Tom.
I'd love to
talk more,
because it's all about it's all about the meeting, the aerobic and anaerobic. They're all natural swings and parts of the cycles of the systems of the earth, aren't they? And I do think that's why it works so well, putting Bokashi in the buckets and then adding it to a composting, because you've got an anaerobic followed by an aerobic, and then you've got more of a complete breakdown, and it's evident in the material. Just
to end today, obviously you've plugged your website and your Instagram. Can you just remind people of how they find you?
Yeah, great. So it's the website is the Mycelium Composting Network. I'm pretty sure if you just type that Mycelium Composting Network into Google, it'll come up, and you can sign up. You'll find it on the website. But otherwise, it's ultrasoil.org, and that's our main website for inquiries about any composting systems and stuff that you might be interested in as well. So yeah, ultrasoil.org or ultrasoil. Yeah, thanks very much.
If you can't find them, get in contact with Agriton. We'll put you in the right direction for ultrasoil. So thank you very much, Tom, and hope to speak to you soon.
Brilliant, lovely to talk to you, Martyn.